Well, Assalamu alaikum, and it's always good to join Dawn. So I think what happened is that Pakistan usually has been in a quarterly review. When we did the 2013-16 program, that was the only long-term program that Pakistan has ever completed. We were doing our quarterly reviews. This time, with a bit more confidence, and the friendly countries were there. So the overall package for Pakistan's macro stability, the way I think everything worked, we took that to 6 months. So IMF also probably agreed. And that gave the authorities a bit more time to do their work. We had the program in July, but then it took another few weeks before the staff took to the board and the approval came. But I think what happened is that the quarterly results had come in, and there was a discomfort that we may have gone off track on some things, and some things could be better adjusted. So there was no harm in doing a stock take of where the country stood. Let me say this. I know the press has said this a lot of times that an unscheduled visit happened. Yes. But in the 6 monthly review cycle, sometimes the fund tends to do what happened in terms of arriving in Pakistan and stock taking the first quarter, and also how the 6 months and the whole year was looking, so that if there any adjustments were required, could be made well in time so that the results could come through in FY25. And authorities do tend to lag behind when there is a 6 monthly review. I think that's the whole perspective in which you saw the fund team in Pakistan. So I think we were good on the monetary targets, and you've seen monetary easing in Pakistan more than expected because the inflation came down faster than one would have imagined. 7.2% CPI last month, and the rates came down from 22% on the policy rate to 15%. So that was a faster move there. So there was monetary easing. I think on the external front also, though, people think there is a shortfall because we could not get the $1.2 billion oil facility from Saudi Arabia, as the country had promised the fund. There is a delay, I think, in that. There is no reason that we can't get that facility. I've negotiated this for Pakistan a number of times, and we are usually able to. The problem occurs that if you delay for 5 months, let's say we get the facility in December, then you only have $700 million in FY25, because it's $100 million per month kind of a facility. That doesn't mean we won't get it. But on the other hand, I think the current account estimation that the fund went with, which was $3.5 billion at the beginning, is not going to happen. I was just looking at today's figure, and there was a surplus even last month. So where we are running, I doubt we cross and reach $3.5 billion. So there is room there. So if the Saudi facility even doesn't come through, I think we are comfortable on the gross external financing needs for FY25, as long as the reprofiling of the $16 billion, whenever it becomes due, whether it's commercial or with the friendly countries, namely UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China, keeps happening as promised. And I think it will. So we were okay there. But I think on the fiscal side, which has always been our tougher side. And let me also say, whenever you go into a fund program, the external and the inflation are usually the easy ones on the macro stability, because you put brakes on the growth, you put brakes on the imports. So imports come down, current account settles, and our remittances tended to do well as rupee stabilized. So current account balance automatically, and the reserves position went to more than 2 months. But on the fiscal side, which is challenging, and for 77 years, we haven't done things which we wrote in the program. We'll go and do agriculture income tax. So we said in October we'll legislate, but that legislation didn't happen till the day fund was in the country, and Punjab went ahead and did the legislation. But then there are still 3 more provinces to do that legislation. Also on the FPR side, I think starting with a 40% growth expectation this year both for the fund and the IMF board when they went ahead and signed with Pakistan this kind of a accord. I think we should have been a thought that seemed on the higher side. But here's the important part: as inflation has come down faster than estimated, your autonomous growth. So what's autonomous growth? So let's say the economy was growing at 3% and inflation was at 15%. So 18% nominal growth and taxes would come through. But let's say now inflation comes down to 8, 9% and your growth's hardly meeting 2.5, 3%. So your autonomous growth falls by 6 percentage points. So it's now only 12%. So there is a gap arising. Also, I think the 15 or the 1800 billion rupees, whatever new taxes came in or the policy measures that came in, I think aren't really sufficient to make the 40%. So you saw a gap in the first quarter. You saw a gap as we moved on to the fourth month. I think there's a lot of discussion there. So on the agriculture income tax legislation, on the FPR taxation side, I think there is a fair amount of discussion how we move forward on that. But then there is the other side also. The new taxation on the Tajir Dost, I think hasn't come through the way we would have expected. Though we've made good taxation on the retail side by putting in a 2.5% withholding, but that doesn't help the Tajir Dost, on which we have strictly written that we will do the 10 billion rupees in the quarter. So I think that didn't happen. On the untapped third sector, the real estate revising of the rates maybe came in a bit delayed. So let's see what happens there. We were going to have 342 billion rupees of provincial surplus, but it didn't come through. But then as the fund came in and there was reconciliation of accounts, surprisingly, we've gone up to 360 billion rupees with a statistical discrepancy on the Punjab side of about 200 billion rupees. And that's a big one. So these, I think, issues of the stock taking, as we said, I think came under discussion. And also, I think on the sovereign wealth fund, I've always been skeptical on the sovereign wealth fund in a country where we don't have those kind of surpluses in the budget or on the current account. Creating a fund and putting in the profitable entities. So I think there is still work going on and clarity being devised. I think we've hired some external consultant also, but I think there is still not clarity as to how we move forward. Then removing the state intervention or the state footprint. 212 SOEs. You want to set agriculture pricing. You want to give incentives in SEZs. You want to have the federal government run those 17 subjects which are not to be run by them. So I'm just giving you a sense of what the federal footprint is, what the provincial footprint is in deciding wheat price and deciding sugarcane price and deciding cotton price. So the fund probably wants you to think over it and get on the side and let the market work. And Pakistan's example of rice is a very successful example. And then what also came into discussion, I've been saying this, a glaringly great example of Pakistan is the income support program. So why don't we take all our subsidies and put them and part them, whatever we want to give from the federal government and the provincial governments onto there. So I think that came under discussion. So these are issues that go on. I mean, I don't think these are issues that can be settled. But then there are promises, as I said, that we've made. On the primary surplus, we've done well. State Bank gave 2.5 trillion. So we've done well. We've had a primary surplus as promised. On the overall fiscal account, we are comfortable. On the state bank figures, I think we are comfortable. We've had a good one on the expenditure side also. And that's because I think the 9,800 billion we put where we would say that this is the amount of money that we'll give to the markup. But, the interest rates came down faster than expected. So maybe we'll have near 1,000 billion rupees saving. So the tax shortfall could be used there. So all in all, I think this is the kind of discussion back and forth we had. And lastly, on the power sector. How are we doing on the circular debt management plan? We initiated this plan somewhere in 2014 when we wrote this plan, and I think that's got the substance as it has built, and how do we want to move there. And so we are all right. I think macro fiscal framework is stable. There is a certain macro stability in the country, inflation dropping, current account stabilizing, our reserves picking up. I think that's the data IMF would take back. My concern, if I can say in all this discussion, is the following. If this was a stock-taking visit, as I discussed, I would be fine with that. They want to go back, they want to do a staff appraisal, they want to run it through their management, and then they use two words: discussion and decision for the board. So I think we are good for the next 1.5 months with no changes, but let's see what the board comes back. And if there is any kind of thinking on adjustments required somewhere, we could always do that. But I think the sailing is all right as we are moving along. And as I have said, this is very precious time, and this is very precious space of macro stability, which is nascent, that we've bought by being in the fund. We must utilize that with care, with prudence, with real hard work on the fundamentals. And lastly, when I use these three phrases, the fundamental task of selling PIA has not been something that we've been able to do. So on the fundamentals, we continue to wither away. And we had promised the fund that we would do this in August, but we didn't. So I'm sure that came under discussion. So my sense is that Pakistan has now qualified for a climate resilience facility that the IMF could offer, about $1 billion plus. You have to be in a long-term IMF fund program and certain other conditions. So you could get some finance to use for environment. And I think that discussion would also has certainly happened with the fund. I think we're still waiting. We had to write a report. I think Pakistan's called a PIMA report or something. I think we've written that report. So that must be getting reviewed by the fund folks. And let's see how they come back. Pakistan is a country which has been hurt more than the share of the that it has polluted. So certainly that should be another helpful facility that we could get. Our balance of payments would stabilize more as we move along if we are able to secure that as well.